Thank you very much for making time for this. It's over a month now since you left office under a cloud, and during that time you've taken a very low profile. What have you been up to?
Thanks, Hussein, for the opportunity to do this interview. For the last 1 month and a half or so, I have been resting and trying very much to mind my own business.
That is it?
Yes, please.
Do you feel well rested?
I think so. I think it's been a long time since I had some time off, so I've enjoyed the quiet time.
Because when you left, one of the key issues you talked about was your health. What would you say now about your health? Has it improved?
I'm much better. I'm much better. I don't think you can really quite go back to the original self that I was, but I think I have recovered quite a bit. And I think with time and with the change of lifestyle, I think it should be okay.
So how is it then? Do you regret your decision to leave office?
Oh, certainly not. I don't regret at all. The simple reason is I'm a firm believer of purpose and timing. And I think that I did my time in government in that position for this season. And I think during that time I achieved quite a bit. If you look at what we managed to do when I was Cabinet Secretary in the Ministry of Devolution and Planning, I mean, we had quite a number of awards for outstanding performances in various areas. We managed to come up with very transformative initiatives for this government. We contributed, played our role in ensuring that this government is branded really as digital. We had the Huduma Centers, which was an innovation that has claimed international awards. We also rebranded the National Youth Service, notwithstanding the challenges that we had, and also contributed a lot to the empowerment of youth and young people in this country. We had fantastic initiatives such as the 30% in innovation for procurement. We were already in the process of doing public service reforms under the CAPS programs together with the county governments, and so I don't regret. I think for 2 years, looking back, I think we managed to do with the team that I had in the ministry a tremendous amount of work with great achievements, and therefore I have absolutely no regrets
of leaving. These achievements you've enumerated, and fair enough, I mean, they are there. The ministry got a lot of awards, but we still had these scandals that bedeviled the Ministry of Devolution. And critics would say you are very quick, I mean, to own it when it comes to achievements, like the awards the ministry was receiving. But when there's a problem with scandals or corruption with the ministry, you would never take responsibility yourself.
I think, Hussein, I think we need to put this matter into perspective. Let's talk about achievements. Achievements in the ministry are coordinated effort. They're ministry initiatives. You go out together with a strategy and a policy and a drive with a purpose to achieve something. And when you do, you celebrate. Corruption is not a ministry thing. It's not something that we get together and agree, let's do this so that we can now then take the flak for it. I think it's an issue at individual levels. Anyone who engaged in corruption at that level was doing it at an individual level, and therefore you cannot attribute an individual person's decisions, especially for something so wrong, to the ministry or to the minister or anybody else. And so that's why you would not then, and you saw I said that for a very long time, that you cannot take responsibility for an individual's actions, which were not ministerial actions. If, for example, they had been ministry decisions, then that would be a different scenario. So yes, when there are achievements, that must be celebrated as a ministry, because that is what the ministry is intended to do. But corruption isn't a ministry objective.
But if it has happened, if you have a ministry, like you're saying, your ministry, you get achievements, it's a ministry thing. That is what the ministry is supposed to do.
Set out to do.
And you've achieved it.
Yes.
So why don't you also take responsibility when the same ministry, there are problems within the same ministry in other areas like corruption or misappropriation of funds?
And I think let's be clear on the issue of responsibility here when we're talking about responsibility. If you're talking about accepting that there was a problem, that we did, right? We actually even asked for the investigations, that we did, and owned up, and that is the responsibility of a minister or anybody in office, whether they're there currently or not. That is what is expected of them as ministers. However, when an individual decides to flout rules or regulations, that is not a ministry decision. And so you cannot take decisions on an individual, because if you say that, Hussein, even today yourself, the people who work under you, if one of them decides to steal the mic, will you take responsibility for it? Or and it happens everywhere. Or a journalist decides to take a bribe to do a story in a certain way. Will the head of the broadcasting institution take responsibility for it? You cannot. You can take action, but you cannot, because if you say that, then you would have to translate that across the board. That means if it happens in my ministry, if it happens anywhere else, then everywhere where there's corruption, and you know very well that in this country, corruption is almost everywhere, somebody should be taking responsibility for it. So you cannot attribute somebody's individual actions to an institution, and neither can you attribute it to an individual who has nothing to do with it.
Yeah. Right. Okay, but like I said, people say it's a double-edged sword. Having, I mean, it's the same way, like, if I go to the limelight and say, this is my ministry, we won ABCD, I receive awards on behalf of the ministry, I should also be ready to face the flak when the ministry officials have done ABCD or there's a problem with the same ministry.
You face the flak if you're party. You don't face the flak if you're taking action to clean. Because if you say that, as I said, take a policeman taking a bribe in the streets, Hussein. So then shouldn't the minister quit because they've done that, take responsibility for it? Or an individual at the very low level decides to undercut. You're not aware, you're not consulted, it has nothing to do with you. But ministerial achievement have something to do with you, because you're the one who sets the policy, you're the one who drives that policy, you discuss it, you come up with a strategy, you own it, and you drive the implementation of it. And that's why when they win, you share. But corruption is not a shared objective. It's not something that you get together and agree as a group and therefore we celebrate it or take the flag together. No. And I don't think that is the intention anywhere, not in the Constitution, not in the law or anywhere. And that's why when people are charged as an individual, you're not charged as an institution. You don't hear, for example, NYS itself has gone to court. You hear certain individuals have been taken to court, or certain individuals are under investigation.
Either way, there was pressure for you to step aside, and you went through that. What you did was you resigned, and you cited health reasons. But was this, I mean, some would say it was just a good way of you finally bowing out to the pressure of stepping aside, but you just resigning because at the end of the day you became a liability to the government, that this was just another way of doing it.
No. I think stepping aside is very different from resigning or asking for a redesignation of duties. I mean, you step aside when you have been individually implicated. And you know very well, Hussein, during that time, no one implicated me individually. If they had, I would have stepped aside. There was absolutely not a single implication. As a matter of fact, if you don't forget, I was a whistleblower. I'm the one who actually called CID and announced that I have actually called CID to investigate. How that mutated to become that now I'm the person on the other side with the pressure, and it's what I wrote in my resignation. It's baffling that the war against corruption got turned around to the war against Ann Waiguru. And I said anyone who understands how corruption cartels work will understand that this was not the natural way you would expect a reaction to somebody who has actually whistleblowed and is actually willing to hold officers accountable who are under them, which was originally the reason why in the first place we had been we were whistleblowing. So if you ask me in terms of whether I stepped aside and whether this was a way of stepping aside, no. You step aside so that you can go through investigation. Then if you're cleared, you come back. You understand? I didn't do that. I actually resigned from my responsibilities. I have no intention of going back to being Minister for Devolution. I wasn't waiting for a clearance to go back. And I asked for lighter duties because at that time my health was in a situation where I couldn't handle any more difficult pressures.
But this is because of the pressure you had been going through?
True.
For people to call you to step aside?
Not
calling
just,
for you to step aside?
And by the way, not just the pressure of people. I don't think it's just so much about the pressure about people. This issue mutated, and that's what I said in my resignation. Mutated from a fight against corruption to a personal attack on me. And the reason I say that is look at the very things that have over the years, not just this year, over the years where we've had situations where there have been corruption allegations, including even the most recent ones, which have nothing to do directly with government, like the BAT scandals and all that. You don't see personal attacks on the individual, or where you talk about whether they are tall or short, how many children do they have, whose are those children, and those kind of things, you know, getting to the situation where they even actually start following your children around and calling them names, getting into their Facebook accounts and getting their pictures out and getting stories that are all false out there. That was a personal attack. It had nothing now to do with corruption. And if you remember, I said, just looking at how that mutated should tell you, anyone who was interested in the fight against corruption would have looked and said, this is no longer a fight about corruption, because the issue was no longer about the 791. The issue now became about me as an individual, and I need to go out. Okay. And I said in my letter that anyone who understands how corruption networks work would know that this is actually the cartels fighting back.
The reason why I asked why some people may say at the end of the day you resigned because of this pressure to step aside, that was just another way of doing it, although you've clarified. We saw the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission do a raid, your house included. Some would question, why did it have to wait until you resigned as a cabinet secretary that raid was conducted in your house?
I actually don't know even why the raid was conducted. So that's a question that you can actually ask EACC. As I said, as far as I'm concerned, I whistle blew. I don't know what informed them. I don't think they are supposed to explain to me. They decided to do a raid on almost everybody in the ministry at the time. I think we were about 19 people, and they included my house. I think that question you can only ask them. But as far as I'm concerned, I know I whistle blew, and my conscience is clear on that issue. And there is, so far, even so far as you have heard, there has not been any direct linkage or allegation directly implicating me as an individual.
Some would say, would they have done the same if you were still the minister?
Would they have done it?
The same?
I don't know, I guess so.
It was curious that this happened after you resigned. Some would say, why didn't it happen while you were a minister? Maybe because of the power you wielded then, they could not dare do such a thing?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think they are bound by anybody's position. I mean, they're not answerable to ministers, you know. I think, in my opinion, that they would do the same whether you're in office or not, if they felt that they needed to.
Can you describe to us how the raid was, or where you are when it happened? I
think, Hussein, maybe I should say this was one of my lowest moments. I was here. I got a call from somebody in the morning telling me that the media is coming to my house. So I said, my house? They said, yes, they're coming to your house. In fact, EACC is on their way there. I said, to do what? I said, I think they're going to several houses. I said, okay. So then they came and they did what they needed to do, which is, I think they went everywhere and they checked everything, yeah.
Did they just walk in? Did you have to allow them in first? Or?
Yes, I mean, they're very professional in the way they do it. My lawyer was here. They, I think, showed the warrant or whatever, the search warrant, I think. And then you allow them because you're bound to do that. And so they go room by room and they look for whatever it is they were looking for.
Right. Any explanation given as to why they were doing that to you?
No.
You did not ask them why you're doing this?
I mean, you can't ask the people who've been sent because clearly they are also under instructions. They tell you they have a warrant, they are here to search, and they search.
Anything they found? What we hear, of course, nobody was here to see that unless they are the sources themselves, the officials of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. We hear there was money that was found here. That's what we hear, about 50 million shillings. You
also can't believe social media. There was absolutely not a single, other than the loose change that we use for shopping in the house, there was absolutely no money found in my house. They picked documents though, quite a number of documents, personal documents. They carried laptops, iPads, flash disks, yeah, mostly. So electronic data that has data and documents. There was not a single shilling. And by the way, Hussein, knowing the way it was and the amount of media attention that it got, and I keep wondering why it was only my house where you had all the media houses outside the gate. If they had found a shilling, if they had found 1 million shillings, it would have been in the headlines. I had already been in the headlines for lesser things. So there was absolutely no way they could find that kind of money in my house, and it's not reported. There was absolutely no money found in this house.
Right.
And then we recorded even the opening of the safes and all.
We saw your defense at some point saying you went to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission as a witness. The EACC came out to say that they did not say you're a witness. So what are you to them?
I don't know. They're the only ones who can answer that question.
But they haven't cleared you?
I'm not even aware I'm under investigation.
But they were here to check, to get data from your house, like you said. They did they searched your house. That shows you're under investigation? Maybe,
but from where I sit, not necessarily. I think they were looking. They probably were looking for something. Maybe they had been told, like you have had, maybe in social media, that there could be money in the house or something. I don't know whether that's what they were confirming, but I wouldn't necessarily say yes or no because I have not been informed as such. You know, I wouldn't say that. I think the last time I saw, they said that I was a person of interest together with others who were involved in running National Youth Service.
Some of the things you talked about is how personal this was, and again, maybe it's because of, people will say maybe it became so personal, or it got a lot of headlines and everybody was talking about Waiguru because of the stature associated with Ann Waiguru, and especially people saying, and we saw actually State House coming to your defense at some point when people were saying Ann Waiguru should step aside.
I think it's not so much about status. I think it's about principle. You see, what government did is to try very hard to set a precedent where you do not crucify whistleblowers, because if you do, then you set a precedent where no one will ever say if there's corruption. In fact, at this point in time, I don't think there's anybody who will discover corruption in their offices and say anything from what they have seen me going through. And I think at that time, that is what they were saying. And I think it was right because it is in line with the law. You can't be the one who calls. There's absolutely no evidence linking. The investigating institutions have not said anything, and you ask somebody to step aside. You can't be asking people to step aside for the sake of it, because you start a precedent where if someone doesn't like your face, they just make an allegation, then you have to go. I mean, you don't run institutions like that. So it's got nothing to do with stature. I think it's an issue of principle in terms of what was right and what is actually legal and what is constitutional.
So why do you think, I know these questions have been asked before and you've responded to them, but why do you think State House had to come to your defense? Yet we had other cabinet secretaries before who went to the EACC and they were saying, I don't even know what I'm coming to do here. I don't know what they're saying I've done initially when everything was beginning. Again,
and Hussein, I wouldn't want to draw that comparison, because that's actually comparing oranges and apples. You know, this is a very different situation. I mean, again, this was a whistleblowing situation. There was no investigation that implicated. The one that had actually been done by CID and all had implicated other people. So you cannot say that it's the same thing, because for the other cases, to the best of my understanding, and I'm not, some of those questions I think you should call EACC and ask them, not me, is that they're the ones who actually made the recommendation. You understand? So it wasn't from social media. It wasn't people writing stories in the newspapers. It was actually the investigative institutions. And even for us in NYS, when the investigative institutions finished this issue, they actually made the recommendations and action was taken. And those who were listed in that list actually did step aside and were taken to court. Yeah.
Right. Again, back to your status that people were talking about then. Many would say there was some, and this question was asked severally, like what relationship does Ann Waiguru have with the president? Or what is there special? Are you special to the president in any way?
I think, Hussein, I know where you're trying to go with that question. And I think it is very very sad, should I say, very sad the way this country stereotypes women. And a woman cannot be intelligent, young, maybe slightly attractive, and not have any relations with anyone for them to move up. And I think it's a very sad thing, if you ask me. Not just for me, but for women across the country. I think we need to move as a nation from stereotyping women and saying that the reason why a woman makes it to a big office is because you have a certain... And that's another of those lies that have actually been peddled a lot in social media. You know? Yeah, and I think it was deliberate, and that's why I said this was actually a personal issue more than anything else.
So what would you describe then the relationship you had with the president?
It was a normal relationship like any other cabinet minister. Yeah.
So according to you, this was just another one of those other personal things that was going on, the vendetta and the attacks on you?
Yes.
Then with President Kenyatta again, did you talk to him when you were resigning prior to your resignation? Did you tell him you want to resign?
Hussein, these jobs are not, we don't have a right to them. You are appointed. And so when you're appointed, you take an oath of office to serve conscientiously. And when you do that, it's not because it's going to be rosy or it's going to be easy. In fact, a lot of the times when you take the job, you have in the back of your mind that it's going to be a little difficult. Maybe mine was a lot more difficult than we actually anticipated. And so the decision to stay or go is not a decision that you make by yourself. You don't wake up and say, I have had it, I have now packed and gone. Because you don't appoint yourself. And you are under an oath of office. And there is a procedure for appointment, and there's also a procedure for exit. So, of course, when I became a bit unwell and I couldn't take it any further, that conversation did happen.
And he okayed it?
Yeah.
That conversation, was there such a conversation before when there was a lot of pressure on you to just...
Again, as I said, it's not a decision that you make by yourself. Yeah.
The question is, did you ever try to do that before, to ask for a resignation before?
And the answer is, you can never make that decision by yourself.
Right. Okay. Again, with President Kenyatta, when people were saying you should step aside, we had the government led by President Kenyatta trying to fight corruption and all that. Did you ever feel that you were putting the president at a difficult position in his crusade against corruption?
I don't think so. Again, as I said, this is not a decision that you make by yourself. And I've already explained the issue of precedent, and I also have explained the circumstances under which I was at. So it wasn't like I was implicated and then I refused. In fact, you can't refuse. How can you refuse? You didn't appoint yourself. And you can't decide to stay, neither can you decide to leave. Because there is a procedure, as I said. So, in my view, I don't necessarily think so. Yeah.
The talk then, and I'm sure you heard it, is that you're putting him at a very difficult position. You're even putting the Jubilee administration and even the coalition itself politically at a very difficult position. They were actually some, and I'm sure you heard that, some are actually calling you a liability to them now.
I mean, I guess everybody would have an opinion, but as I said, these are not decisions that you make as an individual, not even as a minister. And you would never make a decision to stay or to go on your own. You've
talked about light duties. Light duties that he will deem, can fit to your satisfaction. Let me just ask you, has such a thing happened? Have you talked about light duties that you can do?
No.
Not at all?
Not at all.
There was no response on that even after you resigned?
No.
Right. Would you go back to, given a chance, to being a cabinet secretary again?
No. Right now? I think lighter duties right now.
Maybe in future?
I don't know.
By lighter duties, is it government you're thinking, or any other?
I think I'm open. Any other, the lighter the better.
So if it's any other lighter duties in government, you'll still go to work for the government?
I think so. I think I'm committed to public service.
Are there any acts of commission or omission that you think you should have done or should not have done during your time as a cabinet secretary?
I have had a lot of time to reflect in the last 1.5 months. And I honestly don't know anything I would have done different. Not when you consider the context, especially if you understand what it means to take an oath of office and to stand by what it is that you took under the oath of office. So if you're asking in terms of would I have whistleblown? Yes, I would have. Would I have admitted that there has been a problem? Yes, I would have. But I would also be very careful not to start setting a precedent where people who want to clean up government institutions, and there will be that in the long term, where they are put in a situation which becomes completely unbearable by cartels or other political factions, to actually be able to run institutions as we would want them according to the Constitution and also according to our oath of office. So in terms of omission or commission, no, I don't think that.
As regards to and as regards to corruption in the ministry, are there any acts of commission or commission?
No. The minute I knew there was a problem, I took action. To the best of my knowledge, what action would be taken by somebody at my level. So I don't necessarily think there was any act of omission or commission.
If you had a chance to go back, or don't even go back, I mean in hindsight, is there anything you'd have done differently?
I don't think so. I think everything I did to the best of my ability, with adequate consultations both internally, mostly as much as we could, and considering all the circumstances. I don't see anything that I could have done differently. The only thing that maybe we did not do well is not respond consistently to the media allegations, so that by the time you're thinking to respond, it had already gone too far, you couldn't withdraw it. Because maybe we assumed that maybe let it run for another week, another second week, maybe it will go down. Maybe we could have improved our communication a lot better and explained things a lot better out to the public, maybe engaged the social media better. I think that maybe in a sense, to the certain audience that consume that information.
Yeah.
I think so. Maybe in communication we would have done a lot better. But in terms of actions that were legal or procedural, I think we did the best that we could under the circumstances with the best judgment that we had.
Would Ann Waiguru be ready for a lifestyle audit?
From where I sit, they've already done that. They've picked all the documents that pertain to us and our lives. They are reviewing them, have reviewed them. We're waiting to hear their feedback. I think one of the reasons that you ask that is because of my house. I think that's been one of the things that has been going...
Because it has been said you bought houses at 150 million shillings, and in fact 3 houses in cash.
Wow. I mean, I don't even know who can do that, you know. First of all, my house is not paid for. It did not cost 150 million. Forget even the other 2 which don't exist. Nowhere near that figure.
You say you have one, then forget about the other 2 houses. You say you have
right
one
here
house.
where we are, as in this house. It's not even paid for. A deposit has been paid for it. It's under mortgage. There's a provision that Cabinet Secretary has got at 3% for 20 years. This house is actually under that facility. Anybody who would care to check would see that most of it is financed by that. So all those are just, and that's why I said it was a personal attack. That was fabricated lies, just like all the other lies about my children and the cars that they drive, etc., etc. And associations and things like that. I think there was a scheme to tarnish my character, because whoever they are, whether it's the cartels or the politicians or whatever, needed to portray, because in my view, I think people think as they are. You know, Hussein, before I joined government, I lived in Runda. I owned a house in Runda before I joined government. I was working with the World Bank before I joined government. I have been assistant vice president at Citigroup, you know. I drove a Mercedes-Benz before I joined government. You know, so this has been a lateral move for me from a house that I actually own of equal value to this one, which I've taken a mortgage and a government initiative. So if you have those other kind of conversations, it's because somebody is interested in tarnishing your name and reputation, because I can't see any other reason as to why you would have those kind of rumors going around. There were others. Here I own malls somewhere in Tuskys and Tuskys Chap or something like that, or Machakos and Mranga. I don't own any building anywhere. You know, I don't have those malls that I don't own. You'd be very disappointed if you did, and they have done it anyway because they've collected all the documents that have to do with us. So, yes. So, and we declare our wealth. In fact, as government officials, we did it when we were being appointed, and we do it every 2 years. So there is really not an issue. I've seen other conversations about Imelda Marcos, I think, lifestyle. I think everyone who knows me laughs. People who worked with me know that I negotiate for the shoes I wear. And I don't pay anything more than 2,500 for my shoes. In fact, the people who sell them to me, and you can check with them, by the way, it's one supplier, and there's been the same supplier for the last, I think, 7 or 8 years. They have a problem supplying me because of my negotiation. In fact, I have friends who tell me we'll pay the difference, the 200. Just cut it, you know. So all that has been fabricated. And Imelda Marcos lifestyle, anyone who would care to look at the videos, because I've been in the media quite a bit. I was on social media, I think, every day on Twitter and all. Look at the jewelry I wear. It's the same one. And the same jewelry I've been wearing for the last 5 or 6 years.
Some would say, again, it's just on the face value when you talk about jewelry or the shoes you wear, or, I mean, that could just be on the face value or camouflage of what we don't know. What would you say Ann Waiguru is worth?
In terms of assets, maybe counting this house, which is on loan, maybe 160 or something. My house in Runda, this one, and maybe a few others of maybe 10, 15. And then liabilities, about 80.
Right. So
really, net value, nothing significant to write home about.
Right. By 160, you mean million?
Yes.
Right. You said, and I quote you when you're resigning, the resignation letter, the fight against corruption eventually mutated to the fight against Ann Waiguru with the focus of shifting from the real purveyors of craft. You said how it caused a lot of pain to you personally and your family, that this was a frenzied but organized attack on your character, and some politicians joined the fray. And now that you're talking about this being so personal, and even mentioning politicians joining the fray, who was behind this then? Who do you think was behind this, if it was so personal?
I think it was obvious it was personal, and it's obvious there were politicians. I mean, you saw them. I mean, there's those ones who were every day not waiting to hear the facts or not the facts, and were calling on my stepping aside and resignation, and they were there. And I made it very clear. I mean, in the letter that some of them did join in, and it's a fact that they did. So, and I wouldn't say an individual, because Hussein, in that case, I mean, you know, this is not the first time that someone has attempted, or people have attempted to get me out of office. Your guess would be as good as mine in terms of who would be the driver behind that.
But you've been talking about this mutating into a war against you. But this is an independent institution carrying out this investigation, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission.
No, don't mix up the issue. The people who were carrying out the attack and asking for resignation was not EACC. Yeah. At
the end of the day, we had EACC when you went before the EACC.
Yeah, I think you're mixing the two things, Hussein. There is the issue of, you asked about the pressure. The pressure was coming from a social media drive, the print media, and that had nothing to do with the investigative, and that had nothing to do with the investigations that were going on. And if you remember that you would have headlines from about June 26th to about November 2nd. I think half of those headlines had something to do with me. As an individual, as in Waiguru, this, not NYS, not the 791, but me, the name, and my picture. And it was a concerted effort. And that's why I said it was a personal attack. I mean, recently we've had very many issues of corruption, including allegations of other things that have been happening, such as Eurobond and all. You don't see them putting Rotich's picture in the newspaper every single day when they talk about. They actually just talk about the Eurobond. But in my case, instead of talking about the NYS scandal, they would talk about Waiguru. So that's why I said it was an individual attack on me. So separate the issue of the institution from the campaign that was driven, in my opinion, by a convergence of interest, both from a political side, those who really did not want the transformation that we were doing under the National Youth Service, and the cartels that had been affected by my whistleblowing with regard to the National Youth Service scandal.
Well, some would say this is a plum ministry. Devolution was was then a plum ministry. I mean, the amount of money that was going there as the budget, I mean, it would interest Kenyans to keep talking about it. That what you're saying may not really hold water, because they also want to know what happened in that ministry. The amount of money that was lost, the devolution being a very key ministry, handling a lot of departments in the government right now. So that is why people had interest.
I don't think so. And I've said that, Hussein, I don't think so. I mean, the total budget of the devolution ministry was in excess of 80 billion. The money that we whistleblew ourselves and discovered as being lost was 791. I mean, even in terms of ratio, the focus, if you're talking about what happened in the ministry, in terms of ratio, you wouldn't see that weight. You know, you don't see that weight. And that's what I've said. Even you Hussein, who interviews people, you know very well you have a list of other allegations, current ones right now, you know, which are in the media. But nobody is driving it at individual level. They're talking at institutional level and asking for accountability at institutional level, but not at an individual level. And that's why I say was obviously a personal attack. Anyone who cares to see it will see it for the truth that it is. It is a personal attack. I don't believe it happened without a purpose. I don't think in life things just happen, maybe because of my faith. I think what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think I've come out a very strong person. I think I have had time to reflect, to review. I think I'm a better person in terms of being shaken. You know, you cannot go through that kind of fire and not benefit from it. I think, in my view. So it's been difficult, yes, but I do not regret it. I think it has made me a better person, a stronger person. I have certain perspectives that are different from what I had before in terms of expectations. I'm not as naive as I was before. I trusted everybody I came across. Now I take quite a bit now with a pinch of salt, and I've learned my lessons in public service and all. So I think all in all, I thank God for the experience.
But how was it when it was happening?
It was tough. It was like a furnace. Yeah.
And to your family, your son, like you said?
Mostly my older one. First they were okay until it became very personal. It was very tough. In fact, at that point is when I said I'm quitting. You know, when it became extremely personal. And you see,
when it got to your son?
Yes.
That is when you finally decided? I
think there's a line you draw. I think so, because they're not government employees. They didn't ask to be civil servants, you know. They didn't ask to be attacked and insulted and have their Facebook accounts hacked by people they don't know. Yeah.
Some would say it comes with the territory. The mother is a cabinet secretary holding a big position in this country.
I guess so. I wouldn't want to say that it comes with the territory. I think as a society we failed. You don't go there. You don't go to children. Yeah, you shouldn't. There should be a line that you draw. Yeah.
For the record, is there any clarifications that need to be made in terms of that photo, just for the record?
Which photo?
Your son's.
My son, the car. My poor son. My son is an ordinary teenager. If you see somebody with a funky car and he asks for a ride because you happen to know the person, they will get a ride. They'll take a picture, they'll post it. That's what teenagers do. I mean, it has absolutely nothing to do with us. We don't own it. We can't even dream of owning it. Where would we get that kind of money to do that kind of thing? So, and it's just, people go to the car motor shows, concours, and take pictures and post them. Does that mean they own them?
Initially, you had said that no money was lost. What happened then that it was found out that there was money that was lost?
I'll clarify, because I think this one confuses many people. When we whistleblew, right, we were told that there was an attempted fraud of 800 million. That money wasn't lost. That was stopped. But after we stopped it, we saw that there were some companies, the CID discovered that there were certain companies that would have benefited in that 800 that we stopped. And so what they did is that they said, let us check if these companies have done business before with the National Youth Service. And when they checked, they discovered that they had actually done it, and that is when we said there was fraud. So there's 2 instances. So it's not one. So yes, there was no money loss of the money that we whistle blew, the 820. What we did is that we went backwards to check have these guys tried to do this before, and discovered that actually it had been done in December. And we were saying, by the way, we had a choice to keep quiet and not say that it had happened, and said we've stopped the 800 and that's it. But in our good conscience, thinking that we were serving this country with diligence and fighting corruption and strengthening our systems, we were transparent enough to say, actually, we have found out that these guys have been around, and this is the amount of money that they had taken so far. And then the story now spun. So yes, no money was lost of the 820, because that money was stopped before it went through. But those companies, the ones that are now in court, had already done a previous fraud that had not been discovered at that time, which we now discovered because of the stoppage of the 820.
What next for you then?
Right now?
Yeah.
Depends on what happens. At this point in time, I'm still resting. It's been a long time since I did my books. I think many people don't know I had started my PhD when I was at the Treasury. I stopped it at some point. Something I'm considering picking up. And then I will continue focusing a lot on, in my own time, on mentoring young people and working with women empowerment. I think it's one of my greatest strengths, and so I will look to do that right now, in the meantime, or whenever, or in the future.
Right. Rumors have been, going around that you may be interested in politics. Your name has been mentioned as maybe you may want to contend as the next Nairobi governor.
No.
Or even Kirinyaga governor.
I'm not a politician. I'm not a politician.
Means you'll never want to?
At this point in time, if you ask me, I don't think so.
But in future, you never know.
I don't know. I mean, who knows the future?
Okay. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Hussein.